Rachel Zegler is an up-and-coming big-time actress who has an impressive stage play career, and who has so far appeared in 3 feature films: Steven Spielberg's well-received West Side Story, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which has just recently released and is performing decently. However, many people probably know her through the fact that she'll be playing Snow White in the upcoming Disney remake of the classic movie, because you've probably at some point seen the controversy surrounding this movie, and Rachel Zegler's involvement in it. It seems in many ways that Rachel Zegler has become the new scapegoat for haters of Disney and woke Hollywood in general, to target and create some kind of outrage around. I mean, all of our usual suspects like RK Outpost, Geeks and Gamers, Nerdrotic, The Quartering, Josiah Rises, Heel vs. Babyface, etc. have all joined the bandwagon of making videos every time she says or does anything. They use her as one of the more recent symbols of woke Hollywood, trying to channel people's general anger towards wokeness in modern Hollywood towards Rachel Zegler herself. She's become a scapegoat, and unless you're a mindless zombie, you'd know that she's not the problem, if there even is a problem to begin with. Sure, she might have said some things you don't like, but she doesn't have any real power, and yet she's used as a scapegoat for woke Hollywood, and for people to aim their hate and anger towards. It's pathetic. A bunch of these channels also jumped on the idea that Rachel Zegler had been fired by Disney and blacklisted from Hollywood due to her controversy, even going as far as to make up situations where she's suing Disney and Hollywood. The worst example of these channels is probably Mike Zeroh, who is nothing more than a liar. He's been going very hard on Rachel Zegler, almost turning her into the new Brie Larson, and almost none of his videos have any foundation to stand on. This man just makes shit up all the time, and then he posts multiple videos a day, and I mean, look at these titles. There is no integrity whatsoever. It's the same meaningless, dishonest, and bullshit content he's been making for years, and yet he gets thousands and thousands of views on each of them. There are genuinely people who watch this shit religiously. Man, I need to make an updated video on Mike Zeroh because I have a lot to say about him. However, this video is about Rachel Zegler, and a good rule of thumb is don't believe news that is delivered by channels like these. The things they say are all heavily skewed towards their agenda. Their goal is not to report news and facts accurately. Their goal is to make money and farm outrage by making content that fuels the anger of their audience, making them angrier and thus dumber and more prone to bias, which keeps them in this loop of outrage content that in turn gives these channels a steady source of income. Channels that are this motivated by the cycle of anger have no intention of reporting anything with integrity. If you want genuine news about Hollywood, media, and pop culture, then follow actual news sites, not this garbage or sites like Bounding Into Comics. There's a lot of dishonest stuff on the internet, and trying to gain better media literacy is one of the best defenses you can have against this type of dishonest rage bait content. So yeah, for the most part, you can pretty much wave off any large anti-woke sentiment against Rachel Zegler from chuds. There's usually never any substance there, and they're only saying what their audience wants to hear in order to keep them uninformed. However, while there is an anti-woke sentiment geared against Rachel Zegler, which as we've learned from the Brie Larson debacle, is pathetic and a waste of time, I do want to try to look into this drama and try to understand people's reasons for not liking Rachel Zegler, or at least disagreeing with some of her comments, because there absolutely are people who disagree with things she has said, people who criticize her who aren't necessarily part of this anti-woke, non-traditional women are bad, let's make 10 videos on one thing she said crowd. And so I wanted to see if there are any reasonable criticisms to be levied against Rachel Zegler, why she seems to be receiving so much vitriol, and why most of it is way too excessive. So if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, and check out my memberships, but let's delve deep into why the internet hates Rachel Zegler and whether any of the hate is warranted. So Rachel Zegler hasn't had a very long career, so what could she possibly have done to make people angry? Well, I think one of the significant reasons is that she was cast in the upcoming Snow White. Naturally, whenever a Disney remake is announced and a non-white actor or actress is set to play a previously white character, there's going to be outrage on the internet. And you can bet your ass the same thing happened with Snow White. We've seen this previously with The Little Mermaid and Tinkerbell and so on, and it always causes outrage. And listen, I fully stand by the idea that most Disney remakes are lazy cash grabs. Obviously, blood, sweat, and tears have been poured into them by the people actually making them, but their whole existences are muddled by Disney choosing to take one of their popular movies and just remake them in a live-action version, often causing them to lose a lot of the magic that the animated originals had. We also know that the final decision to diversify these movies often comes from the top. Disney knows that diversity and representation is popular both with advertisers and their audience, so they push it because it makes them more money. However, don't get it twisted, just because a Latina woman being cast as Snow White is a money-making scheme from the higher-ups, it absolutely does mean something significant to a lot of people. And it's not a bad thing. Sure, rather than recasting old characters, it would probably be better to make completely new and original stories that feature diverse characters, cultures, and narratives, and many anti-woke channels seem to agree, but guess what? Disney already makes original stories, but those also get called out for being woke, so I definitely don't think we should be listening to the people who cry woke at everything. But for the people who genuinely love Snow White or The Little Mermaid and are confused at the casting, I think that's okay, but try to remember that the original still absolutely exists. Nothing about your childhood memories or love for that movie changes with this new one. However, this newer Snow White or Little Mermaid allows for a newer generation to appreciate these stories and even see themselves represented in these iconic characters, because while Disney have been a pretty progressive studio in terms of creative properties for most of its existence, there really isn't a lot of diversity within the group of iconic Disney princesses. Naturally, remakes will change things. Making these movies in the 2020s will lead to them having a more modern twist, which is good. Stories should be ever evolving and newer generations should be blessed with these stories too. Whether this will be through a mix of remakes and originals, then so be it. I just think the outrage at the casting of Snow White in and of itself is stupid and unnecessary. It's a choice that to most won't change anything. Us white people aren't starved for representation, probably the contrary, but it will mean that some people will be able to see themselves represented in this iconic Disney story perhaps for the first time. And that's a wonderful thing. As long as the character's essence remains the same, which is a discussion we'll get to shortly, don't worry, then the skin color of the actress shouldn't make you mad. It's really not worth your time or anyone else's. However, obviously Rachel Zegler received backlash for her casting like almost all actors and actresses do in these movies, and after this backlash, Rachel Zegler did respond on Twitter, calling some people out for being racist, and just generally speaking out against things she's passionate about, like calling out racism, transphobia, and homophobia. I personally don't see anything wrong with these tweets, but maybe that's because I am also a young radical leftist who thinks bigoted ideas and rhetoric online should be countered. But I also genuinely believe that only bigots or far-right trolls online would get mad at these tweets and especially take them personally. She also addressed this backlash in an interview where she said,
I mean, I never in a million years imagine that would be a possibility for me, particularly Snow White. In general, you don't normally see Snow Whites that are of Latin descent. Yeah. You know, even though Snow White is really a big deal in like Spanish-speaking countries, Blancanieves is like a huge icon, whether you're talking about the Disney cartoon or just different iterations in the Grimm fairy tale and all the stories that come with it. So she is really big in the Spanish language, but you don't particularly see people who, you know, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced, it was a huge thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry. And so it was like,
those people.
Very much this, yes. It was this
people that we
awakening
need to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
Love them in the right direction, exactly.
However, while I think the backlash towards the skin color of Snow White is dumb and unfounded, and that Rachel Zegler has the right to defend herself against bigotry, and to just call out bigotry and other harmful things online in general, I do think there's more of a discussion to be had with her comments about the character of Snow White. Now, Rachel Zegler has made a few comments surrounding Snow White that has caused some anger among fans, and most of these comments are centered around the representation of women in media, which will always cause some anger within certain spaces online. And long and behold, most of the outrage has come from her comments about bringing a modern edge to Snow White, and particularly from this interview with Variety.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that? I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Snow White is running for president.
I'm launching my campaign. I am.
Now, a lot of people were mad at her, but not Gal Gadot for some reason. They love using her as a weapon against woke Hollywood, but whatever. But they were mad at Rachel Zegler for saying that Snow White in this newer version is not going to be saved by the prince, and that the love story won't be in focus, but that it's more about her becoming a leader and staying true to the principles of fearlessness, fairness, bravery, and staying true to oneself that are important to the original. Basically, she feels that the original is outdated in some ways, and that a modern retelling can and should change some things, by not focusing Snow White's character around the prince and still providing a good message to kids. Now, naturally, these comments have been criticized by people with more traditional worldviews for obvious reasons, but she's even received some criticism from people on the left, calling her statements anti-feminists. There specifically was a lot of discussion about this on Twitter and on TikTok.
I could literally write a PhD thesis on the pseudo-feminism that is criticizing Disney princesses. Criticizing Disney princesses is not feminist. Not every woman is a leader. Not every woman wants to be a leader. Not every woman wants or craves power, and that's okay. It is not anti-feminist to want to fall in love, to want to get married, to want to stay at home, to be soft, to want to be a homemaker. None of these things make you less valuable as a person or a woman. The criticism of Disney princesses is always based on one of two things: criticizing women for things that men get to do unquestioned, or writing off a woman entirely because she is or wants to fall in love.
We do not need remakes where original characters that aren't supposed to become leaders become feminist icons somehow. The whole thing with art and artistic expression is that there should be diverse characters, and when every female character has a feminist icon stamp on her, the whole movie industry becomes boring. It just becomes very predictable. We have got films like Brave, like Frozen, like Mulan, like Moana, where the female protagonist is supposed to be a strong, independent woman leader. But then on the other hand, we've got Sleeping Beauty, we've got Snow White, we've got Cinderella, where the female protagonists are still protagonists without being feminist icons and people who are destined to be queens. What doesn't fit into my brain is, why does a woman need to somehow be proactive, extraordinary, have this incredible successful career in order to be appreciated and in order to be considered a protagonist?
Naturally, this still doesn't justify any of the hate she receives, and I don't think the people who say this are saying this either. But it's an interesting argument that we shouldn't get rid of the idea that some women do want to have more traditional roles, want to focus on romance and being mothers and not necessarily having to be something extraordinary. We need to accept that this is perfectly fine if that is what someone wants from their life. The problem comes, of course, when this lifestyle is forced on women through social norms by men in power and by society as a whole. The argument here is that while Rachel Zegler absolutely is a feminist and she is very outspoken about women's rights, these comments here are disregarding the women who don't want to be leaders or be strong, who want that love story. And while I don't think there's anything wrong with this more modern take on Snow White, especially the trying to recontextualize this early 20th century princess story to a world where women do have the choice to want more, I do also think it's a valid argument that this take on the character could be losing some of what made the original special, while also keeping some of it and adding new stuff, of course. If this discussion can be had in a healthy manner, then I absolutely think it's worth having. Also, if we look at the original, there absolutely are some pretty messed up things in it, especially the age gap between Snow White and the prince, and wanting to change some of these problematic and outdated aspects is perfectly fine by me. However, many people also jumped on her comments about how she watched Snow White growing up once, got scared of it, and didn't watch it again until she was cast, and I can understand why some people have a problem with this. I can imagine that if you love the original Snow White movie and have watched it countless times and that it was important to your childhood, that you would be annoyed that a person who doesn't even like the character very much and wants the story to change is being cast in the role, rather than someone who loves the character and wants to stay true to it. Just so we're clear, most of the people criticizing Rachel Zegler online, making videos about her, don't really care about Snow White either. They're just trying to capitalize off the anger from people who actually do care about the source material. But yes, I can understand the anger from genuine fans, but I also think any resentment towards Rachel Zegler in this regard is completely overstated and misguided. First of all, this is a modern remake, things are going to change, and even if you disagree with me that making changes to the original story is fine in a modern remake and would actually make it more interesting, then that's fine. But if you want to be mad about it, then aim your anger and criticism towards the studio and the writers, directors, and producers, not Rachel Zegler. At the end of the day, it's not her choices or opinions that matter for how the movie turns out. She's been cast as Snow White. She seemed right for this rendition of the character and story, and that's not her fault. If there is any fault to be had, then it should start with people creating the movie, because they're the ones who've decided to go this route. However, this of course doesn't mean that I want the creators to receive the hate instead of Rachel Zegler, that harassment and abuse because of a movie is fine as long as it's directed towards the right people. No, not at all. There's a clear distinction between criticism and hate. Don't be a hater, but if you want to show that you're angry about a decision in a civil and constructive manner, then by all means go do that. Just aim your criticism towards the people who are in charge of the decisions. Also, this whole focusing in on Rachel Zegler never having been a big fan of Snow White just feels really selective to me. Because when Harrison Ford and Robert Pattinson actively hated being in Star Wars and Twilight respectively, that was just seen as cutesy and funny, but when Rachel Zegler isn't the biggest fan of Snow White, then everyone loses their goddamn minds. It's a bit weird. She's also made some statements about the prince potentially being cut out of the movie, and while these statements aren't really being serious, it still suggests that the prince isn't important to the story, and I can understand if people find this disrespectful toward the character and the actor. And of course, some people will see it as Hollywood trying to get rid of all the men, which will never happen, you silly people. But I think these statements are fair to be annoyed by. Again, it doesn't justify the hate though. But probably the most significant response to the new Disney Snow White movie was the Daily Wire announcing their own Snow White movie to fight back against Disney. Now, the Daily Wire have for a while been trying to do the whole anti-woke Hollywood thing, making movies that are supposed to be competitors and opposition to woke Hollywood with very little success, but with this new Snow White movie and the newly announced Lady Ballers, they're trying to make their mark. Now, it's very likely that this Snow White movie won't reach anywhere near the same level of success as Disney's Snow White because it's fucking Disney. For all their faults, they're still one of the largest media studios in the world. However, supposedly this version of Snow White will be more truer to the original. However, as we've seen countless times, making a movie simply as a response to something else, to own the opposition, doesn't really work. The movie is probably being made for the wrong reasons. Overall, I think the Disney Snow White movie has promise. Being co-written by Greta Gerwig and directed by Mark Webb has me somewhat excited, but it's also completely fine if other people aren't excited for it, or think the direction is an insult to the original. And it's also perfectly fine to disagree with what Rachel Zegler said in some interviews, but this hate that we're seeing towards her needs to stop. People have been hounding Brie Larson for years and years now, and for what really? Some things she said in interviews, none of that was bad enough to warrant thousands of videos that are still being made today, using her as a scapegoat for all the hate and vitriol some people have for modern Hollywood. It's laughable, pathetic, and inexcusable. People on the internet will make more videos about actresses saying that they don't need men to come save them than they will on the countless amount of actors and directors or studio executives that genuinely are horrible people who are pedophiles and abusers or just pieces of shit. But oh no, got to make another video on Brie Larson or Rachel Zegler because they have some unpopular opinions about how a movie character should be portrayed. Listen, luckily Rachel Zegler hasn't reached the level of hate that Brie Larson receives, but if we don't watch out and combat these toxic sides of the internet and their hate trains of popular actresses, then we might see something similar happen. Rachel Zegler seems to be just rising in fame and impact, and it's absolutely fine to criticize her comments if you disagree with them, but we need to be aware of how that criticism is done. Please don't lean into this misogynist brigading of actresses in Hollywood that only serves to profit from outrage and hatred, rather than saying something meaningful. Civil and constructive criticism should be protected and encouraged in media discussions, but toxic and unconstructive criticism that adds nothing to the conversation except for potential harassment and hate thrown towards the individuals adds nothing of value. If you care about the integrity and importance of media criticism, then please help combat regressive shit like this. Hate and outrage farming deserves no seat at the table. It's fine for someone to disagree with Rachel Zegler, and criticism should be encouraged at that point, but pretty much any hate towards her is completely unjustified. Luckily, with her role in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, she does seem to be gaining more positive attention once again, and I'm sure Rachel Zegler has a long career ahead of her. I just hope she learns to navigate through all this hate she receives, because that shit's not easy. Anyways, that's all I have for today. What do you think about Rachel Zegler in her comments? Let me know down below. But other than that, if you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you suckers next time. Peace out.